What would you do if an entire courtroom started laughing at you before you even said a single word? Most people would feel embarrassed. Some would leave. Others would try to defend themselves. But on that cold Monday morning, the black woman walking through the doors of the Fulton County Courthouse did none of those things. She simply kept walking. The large courtroom was already crowded. Lawyers sat at their tables reviewing documents. Court employees moved quietly between rows. People waiting for their hearings filled the wooden benches. It looked like an ordinary day. Then the woman entered. She was wearing a faded brown coat that looked years old. Her shoes were simple. Her handbag showed signs of wear. Nothing about her appearance suggested wealth, influence, or power. Several people noticed immediately. A young man sitting near the back smirked. Another person whispered something to a friend. Within seconds, quiet laughter began spreading through parts of the room. The woman heard it. Of course she heard it. The courtroom was not that large. But she continued walking as if nothing had happened. That was the first thing that felt strange. Most people react when others laugh at them. She didn't. She calmly took a seat near the front and placed a small folder on her lap. Then she waited. No anger. No frustration. No embarrassment. Just patience. The people around her found that almost unsettling. A few minutes later, Judge Richard Hale entered the courtroom. Everyone stood. The judge took his seat and began reviewing the day's schedule. As he worked through the list, his eyes briefly stopped on the woman. For a moment, he seemed confused. Then his expression returned to normal. The hearing began. Cases were called one after another. People came forward. Arguments were made. Decisions were issued. Time passed. Yet every now and then, someone would glance toward the woman. Something about her calm behavior felt unusual. It was as if she knew something nobody else knew. Finally, nearly an hour later, her case was called. The room grew quiet. The woman stood slowly and walked toward the front. As she approached, a few people exchanged amused looks. One person even chuckled under his breath. The judge noticed. But he said nothing. Instead, he looked directly at the woman. His eyes moved from her worn coat to the folder in her hands. Then he spoke. His voice carried a tone that immediately caught everyone's attention. "Ma'am," he said, leaning slightly forward, "before we begin, I need to ask you a question." The woman stopped. The courtroom became completely silent. She looked at the judge. The judge looked back at her. And then he asked a question that would change everything that happened next. A question that, before the day was over, he would wish he had never asked. The question hung in the courtroom like a weight nobody could ignore. The woman looked at Judge Richard Hale without showing the slightest sign of fear. "What is your question, Your Honor?" she asked calmly. Her voice surprised several people. It was steady, confident, not the voice they expected from someone they had spent the last hour quietly mocking. The judge folded his hands on the bench. "Are you aware," he asked, "that this court takes false statements very seriously?" A few people exchanged curious looks. The woman simply nodded. "Yes, Your Honor." The judge stared at her for a moment longer. Then he looked down at the file in front of him. Something about it seemed to bother him. Not enough to stop the hearing, but enough to keep looking at it. The prosecutor quickly stood. "Your Honor, this matter is very straightforward. We can resolve it in a few minutes." The judge nodded. "Proceed." The prosecutor turned toward the woman. His expression carried the same confidence that many people in the room had shown all morning. "Ma'am," he began, "according to the information provided, there are several details that do not appear to match official records." The room became quiet again. The woman listened carefully. But she did not interrupt. The prosecutor continued. "Can you explain these inconsistencies?" For the first time, she glanced toward the small folder she had been carrying since she entered the courtroom. Then she looked back up. "I can," she said. Another pause. A long pause. The prosecutor waited. The judge waited. Everyone waited. But she did not continue. Instead, she asked a question of her own. "Before I answer," she said softly, "did anyone verify where those records came from?" The prosecutor frowned immediately. "What does that have to do with anything?" The woman didn't respond right away. That silence again. The same strange silence that seemed to follow her everywhere. Finally she spoke. "It has everything to do with this hearing." The courtroom grew still. Even people who had been distracted earlier were now paying attention. The prosecutor forced a small laugh. "You're suggesting the records are wrong?" The woman slowly shook her head. No. Then what are you suggesting? Another pause. Then she gave an answer that confused everyone. I'm suggesting that someone may have looked at only part of the story. The judge narrowed his eyes. The prosecutor crossed his arms. Nobody understood exactly what she meant. Yet somehow her words created doubt. Just a small amount. But enough. The judge glanced down at the file again. Then something unexpected happened. A court employee standing near the clerk's desk suddenly froze. Only for a second. But the woman noticed. The judge noticed. And the employee quickly looked away. As if he wished nobody had seen his reaction. The woman remained calm. But deep inside the courtroom, something had changed. The hearing no longer felt simple. It no longer felt predictable. And for reasons nobody could explain, the woman standing alone at the front of the courtroom suddenly looked like the only person who knew what was coming next. What nobody realized was that the strange reaction from that court employee was only the beginning. Because within the next few hours, a secret connected to her name would begin spreading far beyond the courtroom walls. And once that happened, nothing inside that room would ever feel the same again. What if the person everyone is laughing at is the one person they should be paying attention to? The courtroom had become much quieter now. The laughter from earlier was gone. The whispers had almost disappeared. Yet the tension continued to grow. Judge Richard Hale looked toward the court employee who had reacted so strangely a few moments earlier. The man immediately looked down at his desk and pretended to organize papers. But something was wrong. Everyone could feel it. The judge noticed it. The prosecutor noticed it. And surprisingly, the woman seemed to notice it more than anyone. The prosecutor cleared his throat. "Let's continue," he said firmly. He turned toward the woman. "Can you explain exactly what you meant when you said we only looked at part of the story?" The woman remained calm. She looked around the courtroom for a moment before answering. Then she spoke. "Sometimes people make decisions before they have all the facts." The prosecutor frowned. "That's not an answer." "No," she replied softly. "It's a warning." The room became silent again. Several people exchanged confused looks. A warning? What exactly was she warning them about? The prosecutor looked annoyed. "Nobody here needs a warning." The woman did not argue. She simply nodded. "If you believe that, then continue." That answer somehow made the room even more uncomfortable. Because she wasn't speaking like someone trying to defend herself. She was speaking like someone waiting for others to discover something on their own. The judge leaned forward slightly. "What exactly are we supposed to discover?" For the first time, the woman smiled. Not a big smile. Just a small one. But it instantly caught everyone's attention. Because it was the first emotion she had shown all day. "You'll know soon enough," she said. The prosecutor shook his head. "This is becoming ridiculous." Yet even he no longer sounded completely confident. At that exact moment, the same court employee quietly stood up from his desk. He picked up a file. Then another. Then he walked toward a computer station near the back of the room. The movement seemed innocent, normal. But the woman watched him closely. So did the judge. The employee sat down and began typing. A few seconds passed. Then 30 seconds. Then a full minute. His eyes moved across the screen. Suddenly his posture changed. He sat up straighter. Then he leaned closer. As if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. The judge immediately noticed. "What is it?" he asked. The employee looked up quickly. Almost startled. "Nothing, Your Honor." But nobody believed him. Not even himself. The woman quietly looked toward the computer screen from across the room. Her expression never changed. Yet somehow she looked even calmer than before. And that was the strangest part. Because whatever that employee had just found, she seemed to already know about it. The prosecutor crossed his arms. "What did you find?" The employee hesitated. Then looked back at the screen. His face slowly lost color. The room became completely silent. Finally he spoke. Very quietly. "I think I've seen this name before." The judge narrowed his eyes. "What name?" The employee swallowed. Then looked directly at the woman. And for the first time all day, he looked nervous. Because the name connected to that worn coat and simple handbag was not appearing where it should have appeared. It was appearing somewhere else. Somewhere that made absolutely no sense. And whatever he had just discovered, it was only the beginning. Why would a simple name make a court employee look nervous? That question quietly spread through the courtroom. Nobody said it out loud. But everyone was thinking it. Judge Richard Hale looked directly at the employee near the computer station. "What exactly did you find?" he asked. The employee hesitated. His eyes moved from the screen to the woman, then back to the screen. For several seconds he said nothing. The silence itself was becoming suspicious. Finally he cleared his throat. "I'm not sure yet, Your Honor." The prosecutor immediately shook his head. "Then stop creating confusion." The employee nodded quickly. "Yes, sir." But his face told a different story. He looked concerned. Very concerned. The woman watched everything quietly. She remained calm. She did not interrupt. She did not smile. She simply observed. And somehow that made the situation even stranger. Because most people would be desperate to know what was happening. She already seemed to know. The prosecutor turned back toward the judge. "As I was saying, this hearing should move forward." The judge agreed. "Proceed." The prosecutor picked up several papers from his table. He began explaining the case details. His voice filled the room once again. Yet something had changed. People were listening less carefully now. Their attention kept drifting back to the employee, back to the computer screen, back to the woman. The mystery was becoming impossible to ignore. Several minutes passed. Then something unexpected happened. Another court employee walked toward the computer station. The first employee quietly showed him the screen. The second employee looked. Then looked again. His eyebrows immediately lifted. The first employee whispered something. The second employee slowly nodded. Both men turned toward the woman at exactly the same time. The movement was impossible to miss. The judge noticed. The prosecutor noticed. Everyone noticed. A low murmur moved through the room. The prosecutor stopped speaking. "What is going on over there?" he demanded. Neither employee answered immediately. The second employee looked uncomfortable. Very uncomfortable. Finally he spoke. "It may be nothing." The prosecutor laughed. "If it's nothing, then why do both of you look worried?" No answer. The room grew quieter. The woman remained perfectly still. The judge folded his hands together. His patience was beginning to disappear. "Bring whatever you're looking at to the bench." The employees exchanged nervous glances. Then the first employee slowly stood up. But before he could take a single step forward, he stopped. His phone had just vibrated. He looked down. Read the screen. And froze. Completely froze. The color drained from his face. The second employee leaned closer. "What happened?" he whispered. The first employee showed him the message. The second employee's eyes widened instantly. Neither man spoke. Neither man moved. The judge stood halfway from his chair. "What is it?" Still no answer. The prosecutor looked annoyed. The audience looked confused. Only the woman looked completely calm. Almost as if she had been expecting that message all along. Then, very slowly, the first employee lifted his eyes toward her. His expression was no longer confusion. It was recognition. And that was far more dangerous. Because recognition meant one thing. Whatever secret was connected to her name. Someone else had just confirmed it. And the truth was getting closer than ever before. What could be so important that court employees suddenly stop worrying about the case, and start worrying about the person standing in front of them? The atmosphere inside the courtroom had completely changed. Earlier, people had laughed. Earlier, they had whispered. Earlier, they had judged the woman based on her appearance. Now, nobody was laughing. Nobody was whispering. Instead, people were watching. Watching the employees. Watching the judge. And most importantly, watching her. Judge Richard Hale sat quietly for a moment. His eyes moved between the woman and the two employees standing near the computer station. Something was happening. He could feel it. But he still didn't know what. The prosecutor felt it too. His confidence was slowly fading. Not because of anything the woman had said, but because of how everyone else was reacting. Finally, the judge spoke. "I want a clear explanation." The first employee swallowed hard. "Your Honor, we're still verifying information." The prosecutor immediately interrupted. "Verifying what?" No answer. The employee looked uncomfortable again. The judge's voice became firmer. "Answer the question." The employee took a deep breath, then carefully chose his words. "We found a reference connected to her name." The room became silent. The prosecutor frowned. "What kind of reference?" Another pause. The employee looked toward the woman before answering. "That's what we're trying to confirm." The woman remained perfectly calm. Almost too calm. as if every second was unfolding exactly the way she expected. The prosecutor shook his head. This is ridiculous. But even he no longer sounded certain. The second employee suddenly returned to the computer. His fingers moved quickly across the keyboard. Search after search. Record after record. Then he stopped. His eyes widened. Again. The first employee immediately noticed. What did you find? The second employee didn't answer right away. He simply turned the monitor slightly. The first employee looked. And instantly stepped backward. Not a large movement. Just one step. But enough for everyone to notice. The judge immediately leaned forward. What is it now? The employees exchanged nervous glances. Neither wanted to speak first. That alone made the room uneasy. Because whatever they were seeing, it was getting bigger. Much bigger. The prosecutor finally walked toward them himself. If nobody is going to explain this, I will. He reached the computer, looked at the screen, and suddenly stopped talking. Completely. The room waited. Seconds passed. Then more seconds. The prosecutor continued staring. His expression slowly changed. Confusion. Shock. Disbelief. The same reaction everyone else had shown. The judge noticed immediately. That worried him. Because this prosecutor rarely looked surprised by anything. Yet now he looked genuinely shaken. The woman quietly adjusted the folder resting in her hands. The simple movement somehow drew attention again. Because everyone was starting to realize one thing. The answers were connected to her. Not the case. Her. Then the second employee received another message. He opened it. Read it. And immediately looked toward the courtroom doors. His face went pale. Very pale. The judge stood from his chair. What happened? The employee looked back at him. His voice barely above a whisper. Your Honor. He paused. The entire room held its breath. Then he said something that made every person in the courtroom turn toward the entrance. Someone important is coming. And somehow, the woman didn't look surprised at all. Who could possibly be important enough to make an entire courtroom stop focusing on a case? The question spread through the room the moment the employee spoke. Someone important is coming. No further explanation. No details. Just those 3 words. And somehow they changed everything. Judge Richard Hale slowly sat back down. His eyes remained fixed on the employee. What exactly do you mean? He asked. The employee looked nervous. Very nervous. I don't know if I should say more until it's confirmed. The judge frowned. That answer only made the situation worse. The prosecutor looked toward the courtroom entrance. So did everyone else. For several seconds, nobody spoke. The room had become trapped inside its own curiosity. Meanwhile, the woman stood quietly at the front. Still calm. Still patient. Still completely unaffected. That was becoming impossible to ignore. The judge finally turned toward her. Do you know what they're talking about? The woman looked at him. Then she gave a simple answer. Maybe. A wave of whispers immediately spread across the courtroom. The prosecutor shook his head. Maybe. The woman nodded. Maybe. The answer frustrated everyone. But she offered nothing more. No explanation. No clarification. Nothing. The silence that followed felt even heavier. The second employee suddenly checked his phone again. His eyes widened instantly. The first employee noticed. What now? The second employee showed him the screen. The first employee looked. Then quickly looked toward the woman. Again. That reaction did not go unnoticed. Now everyone in the room was starting to connect the same dots. Whatever was happening, it was connected directly to her. The prosecutor walked closer. Show me. The employees hesitated. Then finally handed him the phone. The prosecutor read the message. His confident expression disappeared. Immediately. The judge noticed. That worried him. Because this was the second time the prosecutor had reacted that way. What does it say? The judge demanded. The prosecutor lowered the phone slowly. For a moment he seemed unsure whether he should answer. Then he spoke. It's asking for confirmation. Confirmation of what? The prosecutor hesitated. The entire room waited. Then he replied. Her identity. Silence. Complete silence. The kind of silence that feels loud. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The woman remained perfectly calm. The judge stared at her. What identity? The prosecutor looked back at the phone. Then at the woman. Then back at the phone. I don't know. But his face suggested otherwise. He knew something. Maybe not everything, but enough to be concerned. The judge's patience was disappearing quickly. "I want answers." At that exact moment, the courtroom doors opened. Every head turned instantly. A man in a dark suit entered. Not running. Not rushing. Walking with purpose. The moment the employees saw him, they stood up. Immediately. The prosecutor's face tightened. Even the judge appeared surprised. The man walked straight toward the front of the courtroom. Straight toward the woman. The room became completely silent. Nobody knew who he was. Nobody knew why he was there. But one thing became clear immediately. He had not come because of the case. He had come because of her. Then the man stopped beside the woman, looked directly at her, and quietly said 4 words that sent a chill through the entire room. "Ma'am, we've confirmed it." And suddenly, the mystery was closer than ever before. What could possibly be important enough to make a stranger walk into a courtroom and speak directly to the woman everyone had been laughing at? Nobody knew. But everyone wanted the answer. The courtroom had become completely silent. The man in the dark suit stood beside the woman. His expression was serious. Professional. Focused. The woman looked at him calmly. Not surprised. Not confused. Almost as if she had expected him to arrive all along. Judge Richard Hale leaned forward. "What exactly has been confirmed?" he asked. The man looked toward the judge respectfully. Then he paused. A long pause. The kind that makes every second feel longer. "I'm sorry, Your Honor," he said. "I cannot discuss that until verification procedures are completed." A wave of confusion spread through the room. The prosecutor immediately stood. Verification procedures for what? The man turned toward him. Again, he hesitated. Then he answered carefully. "For her identity." The room froze. Again. The same words. Her identity. Everyone kept hearing them. Yet nobody understood what they meant. The judge's expression hardened. "This courtroom deserves an explanation." The man nodded politely. "And it will receive one. But not yet." Those 3 words only increased the tension. Not yet. Not yet. Everything seemed to lead to answers. Yet the answers never arrived. The woman remained calm. Meanwhile, curiosity inside the room was reaching a breaking point. The court employees exchanged nervous glances. The prosecutor folded his arms. The audience sat forward. Even people waiting for completely different hearings were now paying attention. Something important was happening. Everyone could feel it. Nobody could explain it. At that moment, the second employee's phone vibrated again. He looked down, then immediately looked up. His eyes widened. The first employee noticed. "What is it now?" The second employee slowly turned the phone around. The first employee looked. Then covered his mouth. The reaction was impossible to miss. The judge stood up slightly from his chair. "What did you just see?" Neither employee answered. Instead, they both looked toward the woman. The same woman who had entered the courthouse wearing an old coat. The same woman people had laughed at. The same woman nobody thought mattered. Now every eye in the courtroom was locked on her. The prosecutor finally lost patience. "What is everyone looking at?" The second employee swallowed. Then spoke very quietly. "I think people online know who she is." The room became silent once more. "Online?" The prosecutor frowned. "What are you talking about?" The employee looked down at the phone again. "There are videos." The judge narrowed his eyes. "What videos?" The employee hesitated. Then answered. "Videos about her." That answer created even more questions. Nobody understood. Who was she? Why were there videos? Why was her identity being verified? And why did court employees suddenly look nervous every time her name appeared? The man in the dark suit checked his own phone. His expression changed slightly. Then he looked at the woman. "Ma'am," he said quietly. She nodded, almost as if she already knew what he was about to say. The man lowered his voice. But in the silent courtroom, everyone still heard it. The story is spreading faster than expected. The woman closed her eyes for a brief moment, then opened them again. Still calm. Still composed. But now something felt different. Because for the first time all day, it seemed like the truth was no longer trying to stay hidden. And whatever was going viral outside that courtroom was about to reach the people inside it. What if the people laughing at you today suddenly discovered that millions of others were talking about you online? The courtroom had reached a point where nobody cared about the original hearing anymore. The case itself felt distant. unimportant. Every conversation, every glance, every thought, now pointed toward one person, the woman standing quietly at the front of the room. Judge Richard Hale could feel control slipping away. Not completely, but enough to make him uncomfortable. He looked toward the man in the dark suit, then toward the court employees, then finally toward the woman. Someone needs to explain exactly what is happening. His voice was firm, but for the first time that day, it lacked certainty. The second employee checked his phone again. The screen filled with new notifications. Then more. And more. His eyes widened. "This can't be happening," he whispered. The prosecutor heard him. "What can't be happening?" The employee slowly turned the phone around. The prosecutor looked. His face immediately changed. Again. That was becoming a pattern. Every person who saw the information reacted the same way. Shock, disbelief, recognition. The prosecutor looked toward the woman, then back at the screen, then back at the woman, as if trying to connect two completely different realities. The audience noticed. The judge noticed. Everyone noticed. The woman remained calm. She still had not tried to explain herself. She still had not demanded respect. She still had not revealed anything. And somehow that made the mystery even stronger. The first employee stepped closer to the judge. "Your Honor." He lowered his voice. But not enough. Several people still heard him. "The videos have already passed hundreds of thousands of views." The courtroom froze. Videos? Hundreds of thousands? The judge stared at him. "What videos?" The employee hesitated, then shook his head. "I think it's better if you see them yourself." That answer only created more questions. The judge extended his hand. The employee passed him the phone. The room became completely silent. Judge Hale looked down at the screen. At first, nothing changed. Then his eyes narrowed. A few seconds later, his expression shifted. Slowly. Noticeably. The same reaction everyone else had shown. The prosecutor immediately noticed. That worried him more than anything. Because judges rarely looked surprised. Yet now Judge Hale looked genuinely unsettled. The woman quietly adjusted the sleeve of her coat. The simple movement somehow drew attention again. Because every person in the courtroom was beginning to understand one thing. Whatever was on those videos, it was connected directly to her. The judge finally lowered the phone. For several seconds he said nothing. Then he looked directly at the woman. Not at her clothes. Not at her old handbag. Not at her appearance. At her. For the first time all day. "What exactly haven't you told us?" he asked. The room waited for an answer. The woman looked around the courtroom slowly. At the audience. At the prosecutor. At the employees. At the judge. Then she spoke. Her voice was calm. Almost gentle. "I haven't hidden anything." The judge frowned. "Then why is your name everywhere online?" Another long pause followed. The woman took a slow breath. Then she gave an answer that instantly sent a chill through the room. "Because people recognized me before this courtroom did." And suddenly, everyone knew the reveal was very close. Closer than ever before. What if the person everyone judged by appearance was actually one of the most respected people they had never bothered to recognize? The question seemed to fill every corner of the courtroom. Nobody was thinking about the hearing anymore. Nobody cared about the paperwork. Nobody cared about the case. They wanted one answer. Who was she? Judge Richard Hale slowly stood from his chair. His eyes never left the woman. The confidence he had shown earlier was gone. In its place was something else. Uncertainty. The prosecutor looked equally unsettled. The court employees were no longer hiding their reactions. Even the audience seemed afraid to speak. The woman stood quietly in the center of it all. Calm. Patient. Composed. Exactly as she had been from the moment she entered the courthouse. The man in the dark suit stepped forward. Then he handed a document to the judge. The room watched every movement. Every second felt important. Judge Hale accepted the document, looked down, and began reading. At first, nothing happened. Then his eyes widened slightly. He turned the page. Read more. And suddenly became very still. The silence inside the courtroom felt endless. The prosecutor couldn't wait any longer. What does it say? The judge didn't answer. Not immediately. Instead, he continued reading. The room grew even quieter. Finally, he lowered the document, then looked directly at the woman. For the first time all day, there was unmistakable respect in his eyes. The audience noticed it instantly. So did the prosecutor. "What is it?" the prosecutor asked again. Judge Hale took a slow breath. Then he spoke. "The information has been verified." Nobody moved. Nobody blinked. The room waited. The judge continued. "This woman is not who we believed she was." A ripple of tension moved through the courtroom. The prosecutor stared at the woman. The court employees exchanged looks. The audience leaned forward. The judge glanced at the document one more time, then spoke again. "For years, she has worked on major public service projects across multiple states." The room became silent. The judge continued. "Her work has helped thousands of people." More silence. The prosecutor looked shocked. The audience looked confused. Because the woman standing before them did not look like the person the judge was describing. And that was exactly the point. People had judged her appearance. Not her character. Not her accomplishments. Not her story. The woman finally spoke. Her voice remained calm. "I never asked anyone to know who I was." Nobody interrupted. Nobody dared. She continued. "I only expected people to treat others with respect before making assumptions." The words landed heavily. Because everyone knew exactly what she meant. The laughter. The whispers. The judgment. All of it suddenly felt different. The judge lowered his eyes briefly. The prosecutor remained silent. The audience looked uncomfortable. But the biggest surprise had not arrived yet. Because while the courtroom was only beginning to learn the truth, millions of people outside were already talking about it. And what happened next would turn this local courtroom moment into something much bigger than anyone imagined. Something that would soon reach far beyond those walls. And when it did, the entire story would change forever. What happens when the people who laughed at someone are forced to confront the truth about themselves? The answer arrived quietly. Not with shouting. Not with anger. And not with revenge. The courtroom remained silent as the truth settled over everyone inside. Judge Richard Hale slowly placed the document on his desk. The prosecutor looked down. The court employees avoided eye contact. Even the audience seemed different now. The same people who had laughed earlier were no longer smiling. Because they finally understood something important. The woman had never changed. She was the same person she had been when she first walked through the courthouse doors. The only thing that had changed was what everyone else knew about her. And that realization was uncomfortable. Very uncomfortable. The woman looked around the courtroom one last time. There was no anger in her expression. No bitterness. No desire to embarrass anyone. That surprised people more than anything else. After everything that had happened, most people would have wanted an apology. Most people would have wanted to prove a point. She didn't. Instead, she simply spoke. "I hope today helps people remember something." Nobody interrupted. The room listened carefully. You cannot understand a person's story by looking at their clothes. The words were simple, but they carried weight. The judge slowly nodded. The prosecutor remained silent. Several people in the audience lowered their eyes. Because deep down, they knew she was right. The woman continued. "Respect should never depend on appearance." Another silence followed. This time it felt different. Not uncomfortable. Reflective. The kind of silence that makes people think. Outside the courtroom, the story continued spreading online. The videos were being shared everywhere. More people were discovering what had happened. More people were discussing the lesson behind it. But surprisingly, the conversations were not focused on her success. They were focused on something bigger. How quickly people judge. How easily assumptions can be wrong. And how much damage those assumptions can cause. The woman picked up her old folder and turned toward the exit. The same folder she had carried from the beginning. The same coat. The same shoes. Nothing about her appearance had changed. Yet now the entire courtroom saw her differently. As she reached the doorway, Judge Hale spoke one final time. "Ma'am." She stopped and turned. The judge paused before speaking. Then he said quietly, "Thank you for the reminder." The woman gave a small smile. Then she walked away. And just like that, she was gone. But the lesson she left behind remained. Never underestimate someone because of what they wear. Never assume you know someone's story. And never mistake humility for weakness. Because sometimes the person receiving the least respect in the room is actually the person who deserves it the most. If you enjoyed this story, let us know in the comments what you would have done in that courtroom. And don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications for more powerful fictional courtroom stories.